Production of Broad and High is funded in part by the Greater Columbus Arts Council, celebrating expression, fostering talent, and connecting the community to Columbus artists, performances, exhibitions, concerts, public art, and more at columbusmakesart.com. From these contributing sponsors and viewers like you, thank you.
This time on Broad and High, we meet two artists who are also curators. Take a behind-the-scenes look at how an art exhibit comes together and hear the soulful sounds of a sensational band that's a mixture of blues, funk, and rock. This and more right now on Broad and High. Welcome to Broad and High. I'm your host, Kate Quickle. Tonight, we showcase the first story in a series called Behind the Scenes, Art Across Ohio. We highlight two local artists who have curated multiple exhibits here in Central Ohio. And we learn that the approach to curating exhibits can be as varied as the art and artists themselves.
All exhibitions are a process. There are different processes for each one, but there definitely is a lot of work. So every show I've worked on, there has at least been work, at least 9 months in advance to get it to where it's at. When you're putting together big events, there's always going to be a team, and I think just in general, we have to work collaboratively. So even when you think about whatever happened before this exhibition, the artists, they work with different people to even get to the point that they are in. The install team, or even like installing the exhibition, there are nights and you might be here until 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's all for the enjoyment of the audience.
I am traditionally a poet, and so a lot of me transitioning into this curatorial and exhibition work has been about trying to figure out how I will engage people through physical installations of my work. And I actually really struggled trying to think visually first. So when I was prepping for the exhibition I have coming up, No One Teaches Us How to Be Daughters, I wrote into it. So I wrote all of the different pieces. I wrote them as poems, and I was like, okay, how does this show up physically? And some of them show up physically without any language, but how does this show up physically in a space? How would somebody engage with this? How does this make somebody reflect, pause, insert themselves into a story? How does this make them concerned with the stories of their own family or their own ideas of inheritance?
When approaching an exhibition and curating, I like to really think about how we can make the exhibition as immersive as possible to really articulate what the topic is. Especially in my case, a lot of the things I deal with is Blackness, and Blackness is such a complex topic, and unless you're a part of that community in particular, you might not understand. I think oftentimes when it comes to exhibitions, we just think about sight and hearing, but what happens when we bring together all the 5 senses and really make you feel like you're a part of the exhibition to help increase understanding?
No One Teaches Us How to Be Daughters starts with a story of a family member of mine who had gone missing, and then I was really stuck on this idea of what it means to be missing and what that means as a Black person, what that means as a Black woman, what are all of the different ways that we go missing within ourselves. So again, just this idea, one single idea that is like freaking itself into a million different ways. And then it hits the visual piece after I've written into it.
Tapestry, Narrating New Thread was the first exhibition we had at Urban Art Space that we were able to like have a hand in, and I was able to place where everybody went. Really considering flow, regardless of all the pieces are in the same space, it's not gonna make sense. There should be a story, it can be a story, so how do we think of curation as storytelling? And then going into Irrepressible Soul, which was a very ambitious project, 27 artists. It was like, I have to tell this story and I have to immerse everybody in this story. And from there, it's just navigating, working with different artists, working with different organizations, having a vision, and then this past year, working with other people to help their vision show.
My favorite part of the experience was really the lead up, like the planning in the beginning, because with it being your first time, you can either think too small or you can think so big. And I felt like there were moments where I would catch myself thinking small, but then I'm like, we got this team, we got this infrastructure, we have these spaces. Let's think as big as we can.
I think the process was my favorite, like not even the events. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the events were just a continuation of everything that went on behind the scenes.
Yeah, thanks.
So the process between collaborating, brainstorming, researching, figuring out how we want to best address issues in the community or have conversations, all that carried over into the actual event.
I'm gonna say the immersive nature of it. The exhibition itself was immersive. The events that we had and all the programming was immersive. So it really allowed me to see even more than just like beyond my head, how creating these immersive experiences in this very engaging space, what that can do.
The opening part of the exhibit is actually pulling from these videos I took of my great-grandmother before she passed. I had about an hour's worth of video of her and I only have like 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, but I'm pulling from that audio and a few other things and some physical pieces that I have, a fur coat that belonged to her. I want to enter on inheritance and then start moving through all of the things that disrupt ideas of inheritance. And then I'm hoping to end in a space that causes folks to reflect on their own inheritance and their own place, their own metaphysical locations of themselves. I think so much about the folks who came before me. For me, that's mostly specifically the women, but I think so much about lineage and the value of the stories of people who've come before me. And so one of the things that I hope for is that people might have a process of reflecting on their own and maybe having their own kind of investment in the preservation of the preservation of stories of people they might still have access to, and of those embodied archives, especially because I think history and retelling is so fickle, and so there are some things that are only accessible for you, and if they are not archived and they are not preserved, they will be lost. Some things are preserved through oral storytelling, but that feels especially important to me as a Black person, is to be in charge of actual documenting and archival of my matrilineage. So I hope that regardless of how folks identify, that they might have a more vested interest in preserving stories of folks around them.
You can't approach each show the same. Every show is different. Every vision is different. There's a different story in each show. So really sitting back and understanding what that exhibition statement is, what the purpose is, the vision, and then going from there, I think that has been the biggest lesson. The most rewarding thing about doing this work is to really see the impact it can have on the artists in the show, on the community that's viewing the show, or in some cases with Ajane or Eris helping their vision come to light. I really enjoy helping. I enjoy putting together shows which for me are reflective of a certain experience in the culture. I think the reactions I enjoy the most are children's. Because I remember being a kid and going to art shows, I'm like, wow. But like, I can only imagine coming into an immersive space when I was a child. So seeing the children's reactions, that's my favorite part about it.
Check out the latest exhibits at Urban Art Space at uas.osu.edu. We've heard from Ayanna Hill, the curator. Now let's hear from Ayanna Hill, the artist. In this segment, she talks about the story behind her work in the exhibit, No One Teaches Us How to Be Daughters.
I am Ayanna Hill. I am the creator and a part of Irrepressible Soul. Irrepressible Soul is a project. It is also a collective and art-based model where we really just honor and liberate Black art and culture. My contribution to No One Teaches How to Be Daughters is the corridor space, which is called I Didn't Ask for My Conception. So in my process of helping Ajane with her exhibition and creative direction and artistic, visual, translating her words to art, she decided 4 weeks before the show opened, Ayanna, you're gonna have the corridor space. And I was like, okay, you gotta go crazy. And I came up with the concept and I shot all the pictures in 2 days. So I took her original exhibition statement about missing daughters and sisterhood and imagining life for Black women and girls and created an exhibition. So my exhibition is homage to the daughters in my family, to the lineage of my mother, my grandmother, and those before, and really honoring that lineage of us all being in the same garden. If I'm in it, I set the camera up and everything, and I just had somebody touch the shutter for me. So technically, they do all still count as self-portraits. That one is large format. So with that being a large format, it was like, okay, let me set this up perfectly. Let me do the focus. And then I had my cousin like, okay, you have to click this, you gotta take this out, and you gotta put it back.
To see more of Ayanna's work, find her on Instagram at Yana Chanel. Next, we learn more about the work of Ajane Dawkins, who has grown from the teenager telling stories at a poetry slam to the docu-poet she is today. Working in both traditional and non-traditional pathways, she still holds one thing true: your stories matter.
I always say that I use my poetry to archive my matrilineage. And by that, I mean I feel really responsible for preserving my family's history, for preserving the stories of women in my family. I think about docupoetics as kind of a spin on documentary work. I think that you get to do a lot of really interesting things with poetry. You get to not lie, but poetry is less about facts and more about what the overall truth is, right? So maybe the room wasn't blue, maybe the song that was playing wasn't a specific song, but those kinds of details matter a little bit less. And so I like playing with the idea of docupoetics and archiving my matrilineage because I feel like it lets me reinterpret stories in a way that honors the women who came before me and in a way that maybe gives them some autonomy in their stories and the retelling. I also think docupoetics are really interesting because I see folks disrupting the idea of what a traditional documentary is and what it means to like archive something for historical record. And I feel like that's really important. There's been a lot of conversation around Black women in the archive and what it means as a Black person to come to all of these traditional archives and not see yourself in them because of historical literacy gaps, because of the way history was historically documented. And so I'm not working oftentimes with traditional archives. I'm working with embodied archives. I'm working with oral storytelling that's been passed down because that's what I have access to. And so for me, part of docupoetics is also taking really seriously these other forms of archival and that are also sometimes more fragile. So even as I'm moving through, or I've been moving through interview, I've had people who I'm trying to preserve their stories who've died on me. And that is the end of that embodied archive. And so my access to it was only present as long as that person was there, like housing it in their body. So that's a lot of how I play with docupoetics. I started my interviews with my great-grandmother when she was in an assisted living facility when she was terminally ill, and I would just sit and ask her questions. And that was the first of a series of interviews that I did. And then I started that process with my mom as well, as I have a chapbook that's coming out called Blood Flecks that's about her, and I realized everything in the book was from my perspective, and I did not feel like it was ethical for me to say that I'm giving my mother a voice when my mother has her own voice and has her own language to talk about and share stories. So that is kind of how I crept up on the process of archiving. So usually I do not know what to expect. Something that has been very, very surprising for me has been how excited people are to talk to me. And I guess not just excited, but willing. I think I always expected, or I guess maybe less expected, but I always feel very cautious because I never want my family to feel like, oh, I'm coming and encroaching and trying to make this grand story about you, or, do something that maybe feels like gross and not just unethical, but voyeuristic, I guess. But seeing how open they are to talking to me is, I think, for me, been a really pleasant surprise. Seeing the way the things they remember shape or shift different parts of a story. Like I have an older cousin who I interviewed recently, and in the stories he's telling, he told a story about him being younger. He told a story about my grandmother, but from the perspective of a child, and like with her as his aunt. And like he told a story about how she told him that she was pregnant with my mother. And I just kind of never think about my grandmother as an aunt or as a baby sister or, in these other roles. When I was first trying to do some of the archival work and I was writing, I did not want to put my family members as characters on the page, mostly because I think that once somebody hits the page, they become two-dimensional, and there's no way for somebody reading a text to know like all of the intricacies of someone. So I started creating characters that were loosely based off of either different people or combinations of people. And one of the characters I built was Aileen, who was built off of a combination of different women that I knew in my family. I got grown and thought I'd be a woman forever. Then I became a mother and a grandmother, and people forgot at some point I was a girl. Your body stew enough children, leak enough milk, have enough babies pressed to the titty, and people think that's all you ever been. A mother, a dutiful wife, and then widow. A surgical blade across the abdomen for the third child, and felt like a sharper one at my neck when my husband died.
To learn more about Ajane's work, find her online at ajanedawkins.com. Austin and the Sid Experience is a band described as a funky music gumbo that you have to experience. We were fortunate to have them join us in the studio recently. Their mix of powerful vocals and dynamic music blew us away. Take a listen.
Tough times, hard stressor. I got pills on the dresser, but it's all up to me what I do next. Yeah, I could fly like an eagle. Something lethal, but it's all up to me what I do next. Your weapon of mass destruction in a world of love reduction. I think it's time discussion, y'all. Mass destruction. I'd stop, then I think again. Like, what would this mean if this were in? I don't know. So hard to say. What could you expect? When the lights go dim and all those things are gone, and on your day of judgment you are all alone. Turn the page in the book of your story. What comes next? And then the walls fall down like Jericho. And then the walls fall down like Jericho, yeah. Your weapon of mass destruction. Victim to a seduction. In the corners of your mind, flip their function. Mass destruction.
To hear more, you can find them online at austinandthesidexperience.com. Well, that is our show. Remember, you can find all of our stories online at WOSU.org, as well as on our YouTube channel. For all of us here at WOSU, I'm Kate Quickle. Thanks for watching.
can make it through, darling. You got to let there be. Let there be.
Production of Broad and High is funded in part by the Greater Columbus Arts Council, celebrating expression, fostering talent, and connecting the community to Columbus artists, performances, exhibitions, concerts, public art, and more at columbusmakesart.com.